Show of hands, who misses these days?
And the strength of the wolf. Is the pack.
Me too. Something about watching my favorite video games come to life in the form of these like live action adaptation trailers was always so cool to me as a kid. And even today, even though I feel like they're not quite as prevalent, which is why I wanted to kind of hop on this idea for a Helldiver short film. And it's so funny because they never really show like real gameplay, right? It's always just like live action stuff, but it was always so cool to see my favorite games come to life in that way. Also, I guess it's worth mentioning, if you haven't actually seen the live-action Helldiver short film, definitely go check that out first, and then come back here and see the behind-the-scenes, because I feel like that makes sense. I'm way behind on thanking all of you for 100 subs, because last I checked, I'm at 253 subs. I can definitely feel the love, and yeah, it's awesome. Thank you. So the story was very driven by Malevelon Creek, and for those of you who are not Helldivers fans, there was a planet in the game, I guess there still is, called Malevelon Creek, where it was notoriously hard to drop in with your friends and beat all the enemies, complete all the missions, and evacuate. It was so difficult that it earned its title Space Vietnam on like TikTok and Instagram and stuff. And I don't know what it is about the Helldiver IP, but people really got into like the role-playing aspect of it. Like, remember the creek, and don't forget those who fell at the creek. That was always so cool to me. And so when I was thinking of a story that I could tell in this universe, I was like, it's gotta be Malevelon Creek, because anyone who started with Helldivers when it first popped off knows what Malevelon Creek is. As I said before, it was called Space Vietnam. Don't really have access to like a jungle environment from where I'm at, so here's where I kind of deviated from canon, I guess, which doesn't matter because it's a short film, like a fan film. In the missions that you play on the planet, you launch nuclear warheads, and so I was thinking, what if those nuclear warheads over time, like the radiation built up and now all of the vegetation and life forms have been wiped out because of the war that's been fought on the planet's surface for so long. And that kind of coincided with the fact that I have several construction sites going on near my house, and all these construction sites had a really kind of like Martian looking terrain, lots of like big red rocks and just like red soil everywhere. A lot of them right now are in the process of just flattening out land for houses, so they're just like totally barren. I kind of figured that we have to do some VFX to tweak what's far off in the distance, but I wanted to have a good foreground to play with, being this like red rocky environment, and then just kind of extend on that through VFX rather than doing the whole thing on like a green screen, for example. Which is a good lesson for, I guess, really any indie filmmaker these days, is you should definitely build your story around what you have available to you, and in this case what I had available to me was construction sites that I could film on, so that's what I ended up going with. So going forward, I knew the premise of the story was going to be centered around Malevelon Creek, but I needed a main actor to kind of encapsulate the emotion that I wanted to portray on screen for this story. So the story did take some kind of twists and turns. Originally, the dog tags that you see in the short film were going to be that character's brother, and there was going to be like narration where he like talks over their relationship and he was lost to the creek, but it just kind of took away from the visuals and I thought it was too distracting, and so we ended up just going with a no narration version, and what you see is what you got. So once the story was in place, it was time to start thinking about how I was going to build this world. And so, kind of harkening back to the sci-fi days of old, with all the classical movies that I'm sure us filmmakers love, I wanted to do something that was practical and tangible in one of the early shots. And so I chose for that to be this like cargo bay, loading bay thing that the Helldiver walks out of. So the set was comprised of lumber that I bought from Lowe's and then some paint supplies that I bought from Walmart. And I think the base was a 4-foot by 4-foot square section. And it was totally out of the frame, so I didn't bother like painting it or making it look really nice, because it was never going to be in the shots. It just had to be functional and be safe for my actor to stand on. And so once I finished constructing the base, I went on to attaching some brackets that you'll see later on in this kind of behind the scenes reel. These L-shaped brackets that I got from Lowe's that I ended up using to attach the walls to. And the walls are 4 foot long, and I believe the height was like 7.5 feet, which ended up being perfect because any taller and they would not have fit into my garage. They were a little bit long at first, so I ended up having to cut a bit off the top. And because the boards were so long and flimsy, I ended up having to create these like runners that went down the length on either side of the board that I just screwed in place, and that added some kind of rigidity to the walls to keep them from swaying and warping back and forth so much. And here are the L-shaped brackets that I mentioned earlier. I actually did not have a socket for my power tools to drive those lag screws in with, and so I ended up having to do it by hand with a ratchet, so that kind of sucked. And then to attach the wall to the L-shaped bracket, it was essentially just a bolt that I ran through with a washer and a nut on the other side. And I just made sure the bolt was long enough to reach through the board and the runner and have room for the washer and the nut to attach to. And then here I'm using my wife to kind of stand in place so I can get the framing right for where I wanted the pipes to be. So I could have put really anything that I wanted to on those walls that made sense to have in this kind of like Helldiver universe. But I also wanted to make sure that it made sense in terms of like camera composition. And one of my personal favorite things to incorporate in my compositions is leading lines. And so I figured these like industrial kind of looking pipes would make perfect sense to have on a wall where you're hearing these like hydraulics going off and there's a ramp lowering, so maybe there's like hydraulic fluid going through them. I don't know, kind of have to just make it make sense, right? And it ended up looking pretty nice, I think, and yeah, I think it worked out. So to attach the PVC pipes to the wall, I ended up using this paddle bit to drill large holes into the wall, and I couldn't find a paddle bit that fit the outer diameter of what the pipe was, and so I ended up having to like go undersized and then sand the hole out to make it increase in diameter to where I could like squeeze the pipe through. And once that was there, I kind of like press fitted these small sections of pipe into those holes, and then put just for good measure a PVC pipe like cap backing on the back side, and then attached the rest of the pipe on the other side. And the pipes were basically just PVC pipe that I purchased from Lowe's, and then I spray painted them with a gold base and then this kind of like chrome-ish looking color as a second coat. And then I handed these pipes off to my buddy Zach, who did a ton of work on this production. He helped me kind of like dirty up the walls of the set to make them have more of like a rustic vibe to them. And same with the pipes. Once I gave those over to him, he did some crazy work with like coffee grounds and paint and all kinds of weird stuff to like dirty them up. Not to mention all the work he did on the helmet, which I'll get to here in a minute. Yeah, he was a great help. And he also has a really solid and brief video over some of the post-production process. And some really cool shots on the day of production. And so I'll definitely link that in the description and also at the end of this video so you can go watch that as well. So I wanted to briefly talk over this shot because this was not accomplished on the construction site location. It was actually done in my garage. And so this was accomplished with 2 lights. There was one backlight, kind of like lighting the back right ear of the Helldiver that you can see there, just to make sure that in between blinks it wasn't total darkness. And then for the blinking red and then green light, I used my GVM light panel connected to my app on my phone that I manually clicked on and off during that shot. And then that kind of like trace of light that you see going down the Helldiver helmet there was accomplished through attaching some black fabric to a piece of lumber and then just blasting my Godox SL60W right at the actor's face and then dragging that fabric down to create this kind of like ramp lowering effect.
Like 266.
So.
Perfect.
So the making of the cape was the closest that I've come in my very short filmmaking career to working with a costume department, and it was a blast. So My friend Morgan, who you saw just standing on that chair, is an actual real seamstress who works on things that are honestly a lot cooler than my cape, dresses and suits and all kinds of like formal wear. She's super talented and I was very thankful to have her on the project. It was an awesome experience to be able to jump in and provide my creative input where I could at every step of the process. So as you just saw, we went into her shop and got my actor fitted for the cape, so the cape fit him exactly in terms of the height and the width, and she also helped me keep the design pretty sleek and simple because honestly I didn't have just a ton of money to blow on this thing, and she ended up really helping me out there too. Would it have been easier for me to just buy a cape off of Etsy and just have that shipped and hope that everything fit and looked right? Yes, but doing it this way really made sure that the cape fit the actor exactly how I wanted it to, and I also had a lot of say in the fabric that we used for the cape. So the cape was actually very heavy. I don't know what the actual weight is, but I would say it's probably several pounds, and so it really added that kind of like thick texture to it that you can almost like feel through the screen, if that makes any sense. Not saying it's at the same like level as this, but think like costume store like Superman cape versus like Man of Steel cape. So yeah, thank you Morgan for your help. The cape was awesome, it looked great, and it worked great. Thank you. So the helmet was a 3D print from an Etsy shop called StarTech, and I will definitely link their Etsy shop in the description below if you want to go check out their prints, because they are super high quality. I really didn't have to sand it all that much to get it to where it needed to be. Like it was printed in 3 pieces, and each piece was substantial. Like you could feel the quality in the pieces. So the helmet was completed, I think like a week before the shoot day, and I put the visor in, I want to say like 2 days before the day of production. So I was kind of getting into a time crunch at this point, so I don't have a lot of footage of me working on the helmet. With that being said, what I did wasn't the super sexy part. What Zach did to it was way cooler. In his behind the scenes video, he goes through, similar to how he painted the pipes, he goes through how he painted and weathered the helmet. And it's a really neat process to watch. He managed to wrap up like behind the scenes stuff like the pipes and the helmet and everything, and some cool clips from the day of production, and his VFX breakdown all in like a 2-minute video. So definitely go check that out. I think I've said that before, but go check it out. I'll link in the description below. But anyways, to give you a brief overview of how I sanded it, I followed along with a guy who made a YouTube video about how to like sand and finish 3D prints and get them ready for paint, and I will link that video down in the description as well. I might lie to you on the grits of sandpaper here, but I think I started out with like a 120 grit sandpaper, and then I worked up from 120 up to 1000. And I did 2 passes of each grit of sandpaper over all 3 pieces that were printed. So I think I went from like 120 to 400 to 600. I did 2 of each of those, and then I took a can of sandable automotive primer. It's like this gray thick primer that you can spray onto stuff, and it's pretty quick to dry. It fills in like lots of like voids and gaps and cracks and stuff like that, and you can sand over it, and it makes for a really smooth finish. And so once I was ready for the primer, I attached all 3 pieces together with some gaff tape on the inside of the helmet, and then I like stuck it onto a stick, sprayed it down with a coat, sanded it with 600 grit sandpaper again, sprayed it, sand it, sprayed it, sand it, and then eventually for that kind of like mirror finish, I ended up sanding it, wet sanding it with 1000 grit sandpaper, and by then it was ready to hand over to Zach for paint, which again he has clips of. So aside from the helmet and the cape, which budget-wise were the only 2 things that I could really make recognizable in terms of like Helldiver universe stuff, the rest of the costume was actually just bits that I purchased from Amazon. And so without going into great detail on that note, because it really was just all me kind of hitting buy now on all these items, I'll just put a list up here on the screen that you can kind of copy and paste for your own suit if you want to. This kind of like suit base honestly could work for a lot of different like sci-fi projects, and I think the total was under maybe 200 bucks, so it's not terrible for a full costume. And last but not least, I wanted to talk through some of the VFX stuff. Personally, I didn't work on a lot of the VFX at all. The only shot that I really worked on was the intro shot that was actually all CGI and done in Blender. So I ended up finding just a free 3D model of a ship online, and the planet was actually generated using a Blender plugin called Physical Celestial Objects. It used to be free when it was an alpha, but now it's like $50, I think, and I want to say there's like an enhanced version that maybe like $100 or something. It was a really helpful tool to use in this case because I'm very much a Blender newbie, and so anything that I could use to streamline the process to get my end product to where I wanted it to be as fast as possible, that was the option I was going to choose. And so really all I had to worry about was the lighting, so like the sun positioning, the keyframing of the ship, and the keyframing of the camera movement. And the part that I didn't work on in that shot was the stars, which was obviously very important because I found that when the ship passed by and the camera was panning, without stars, it was just totally black. And so how that physical celestial object plugin in Blender worked was kind of strange with trying to add stars into the background. And so I ended up exporting that in several different like render layers, and then I sent that off to, again, Zach, who I think handled most of that in Adobe After Effects. He put all the stars in and sent that final product back to me, and that's what you saw in the film. So aside from that initial Blender shot, Zach took care of the rest of the VFX, which was like 200 plus hours worth. I could be wrong, but I don't think that people realize how much of the environment we ended up like masking over with Zach's help to turn this construction site into like a barren wasteland environment. And his behind the scenes video goes in way more detail on the VFX side of things, so I'll leave that for him to explain. If you watched the film and you left a comment, or you liked or you subscribed, thank you so much. Even if you just like watched it and didn't interact at all, still thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I enjoyed making it. It was the hardest thing that I have made so far, but I really wanted to kind of like punch above my weight class with this one, and I think I did that. It definitely was not perfect. There were definitely mistakes and mess ups and things that I could have done way better, but you know, given the fact that I've been doing this for a year, I'm pretty proud of it, and I really hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching, and yeah, have a good one.